When discussing mainline Mortal Kombat games, it's always the exclusive to PlayStation 3D beat-em-up Mortal Kombat Special Forces that tends to get the biggest brunt of critics and fans alike. The way people talk about this game, it's referred to like it's one of the worst games ever made. Totally unplayable, uninspired, the list goes on. But truthfully, as a kid, I actually never had the chance to play it. It was never in a local game store, and back then, if you couldn't find a game in a local store, you weren't finding it. It's only in my adult years that the game has finally been in my hands, and even then, the original versions of this title are quite hard to get a hold of. The point of today's video, as somebody who has a lifetime of experience with the Mortal Kombat franchise, both as a casual fan and somebody who loves to preserve MK history in as many ways as possible, I take a deep dive into this game from start to finish. It had a well-documented, troubled development, a lot of stuff that was meant to be but ultimately left on the drawing board, other ports, other features, it's almost endless. And I'll try and cover some of that here, as well as referencing other videos by creators such as Matt McMuscles, and especially the one and only John Tobias, who gave many detailed insights on the abandoned version of the game on Twitter over the last few years. Now, I've played a lot of old games, ton of which on the original PlayStation, and I wanted to share my overall thoughts over how this game weighed in for a title on such a legendary and iconic console. This is Mortal Kombat Special Forces, with my attempt at a one-stop shop over just what the game was all about, regardless of outcome. I want to cover some of the stories and interviews that I found on the internet first, because Special Forces was meant to be so much more than it eventually was. And I'll link these things in the description of the video because I do recommend that you read them yourself too, if you're just as curious as I was. Now, some of the stuff more commonly known is that you were supposed to be able to play as Sonya Blade as well as Jax Briggs. Now, I haven't exactly found how that would have worked, and it feels unlikely that we'll see anything confirming it unless there are more Twitter stories in the future, but the character select was a clear direction early. In a 1999 IGN interview with John Tobias, he seemed really excited for the project and all the stuff they were able to do with the new generation of hardware. At the time of the article being written, the game was about 30% complete, and you can find such quotes as, "I think this time around we didn't want to base it on one character, but instead we thought it would be nice if you could pick between a couple. We thought it would be nice to select between a male and a female, so Jax and Sonya were the first to come to mind. And because of their military background, it enables us to sort of get away from the Mortal Kombat themes. The story starts out as a semi-realistic military-style game, and it's mission-based. As the story evolves, there are more supernatural events that are sort of typical of Mortal Kombat. It's actually kind of a nice flow that's working out real good." Originally, we would see other characters in the game, such as Cabal, who was eventually axed, but could be seen in old cutscenes that, too, would be scrapped from final release. In this cutscene, the characters even refer to an old storyline that I'll cover in a moment. They really wanted to push out the Black Dragon and expand on the organization, creating a slew of new characters that you'd have to face off against. And on the opposite end, characters like Raiden would return as well, those the community would be more familiar with. Although, apart from Raiden, it is unclear who else would have returned. There would be so much more mobility, animations that the team were particularly proud of. John says in the interview, "We've learned a lot from the guys working on MK4 and Blitz and some of the other things. Our method of doing motion capture has really evolved." And to be fair, with it being stated in this interview that 3D adventure games like Tomb Raider were a clear inspiration behind the project, this makes total sense. Now, from a story perspective, the original story was much more complex, and one that developed some of the Black Dragon characters further, expanding on the idea of Shao Kahn, and flushing out the bitter rivalry between Kano and Sonya. What was the story behind their deep-seated hatred for each other? Well, in a Twitter thread by John Tobias a few years ago, it's actually explained in detail. Prior to the events in Mortal Kombat 1, Sonya and Jax had long been working to shut down the Black Dragon. While in pursuit, Sonya and her Special Forces unit were ambushed and taken captive by the Black Dragon. Long story short, Special Forces team members were killed, but Sonya escapes and damaged one of Kano's eyes in the process. Kano evaded capture and used a back-alley surgeon who saved him with a cybernetic metal eye plate that now we all recognize. And this was the beginning of their feud. Sonya took it all very personal and no doubt harbored guilt for her lost team members, her pursuit of Kano fueled by emotion. For Kano, it was all business. You take his eye, he'll just get another one. Survival fueled by self-preservation. And this was untold fiction that died with the abandoned version of Special Forces. Now, the story of Special Forces would have taken a drastically different turn as well. Once again, confirmed by the man himself on a Twitter thread. In the original Special Forces story, a scientist/cult leader unearths the ancient tomb of a Mongolian warlord named Jagate, who worshipped Shao Kahn as a deity. Jagate attempted but failed to breach the dimensional gateway between Earth and Outworld, expecting to release Shao Kahn's legions upon humanity. But where Jagate's sorcerers used failed magic, the scientist created technology to disrupt the gateway. He needed a nuclear weapon to trigger the disruption, and he hires the Black Dragon to steal it, leading to their pursuit by Sonya, Jax, and their Special Forces unit. I was reminded several months ago of the Special Forces and Shao Kahn connection when I rediscovered an old script for the aborted version of the game. I'm sure Shao Kahn's origins were explored further in later MK games post-me. Now, this stolen weapon is what's being referred to in the old in-game cutscene with a pre-scarred Cabal and Kano. Obviously, the game that we ended up with has none of these things. However, it's clear that the original version for what Special Forces was supposed to be was a lot more complicated and expansive than the game that we now have to look back on. From a development side, it's explained in detail by folks such as Matt McMuscles, so I suggest you watch his coverage on the game too, but long story short, due to various reasons, key members of the project, including John Tobias, would leave midway, leaving a skeleton crew behind to finish everything, leading to the N64 version being cancelled. The camera, once said to be more akin to Mario or Zelda, left as much more of a static one. The mobility and the jumps, all gone. Referenced characters in interviews such as Raiden no longer making the cut. And even things like fatalities, which was said to IGN back in '99, wouldn't likely be something that you'd use against regular enemies, but could be used on more key ones like boss characters. Funnily enough, that was something that we saw in Shaolin Monks many years later, but so much of the original vision was lost, and it just leaves us with the question, what was left? Well, it's time to go over just that, because there's still a full game that we can play. But you have to temper your expectations, as, remember, a lot was no longer in the final version. The new plot of the game is much simpler, leading to a more straightforward story experience, the cutscenes themselves being nowhere near as dialogue-heavy, and to be honest, nowhere near as story-heavy either. Kano frees his Black Dragon members from a maximum security prison, with Kano seeking an artifact known as the Eye of Chitian. This artifact having the power to open portals to other realms. Now, essentially you traverse a variety of different levels, all of which ending with a boss fight and moving on to the next one. It is extremely straightforward. Level 1 sees Jax navigate an abandoned warehouse, being used to shelter the escaped Black Dragon members. There's a lot of basic melee fights here, and it's almost like a tutorial level. You find a few items, reach the end, and conclude with a boss fight with No Face, a flamethrower-wielding, explosive expert, who's really annoying, but once you've killed him, it's totally fine. Level 2 enters a sewer system, and this is where some of the final gameplay designs are put forward. There's more use of weaponry here, as many enemies have machine guns, forcing the player to use their own, otherwise you're just going to take tons of unnecessary damage. You also get access to some computer terminals with some hidden messages, letting the player decipher a hidden code to move on. This isn't used a huge amount in the game, but it does demonstrate the importance of checking the in-game notes section, as you'll have to return to this every now and then. It's also the first stage where you have more than one level per boss, as this one requires the player to clear 2 stages before your boss fight with Tarja, a fighter who uses 2 swords and can teleport or stun the opponent. But this is one of the first areas where you realize that boss fights are kind of meaningless. Jax's flaming dash punch, which is a special attack, absolutely annihilates bosses if you get them against the wall. So any boss variety becomes a pointless venture, as you never really see it if you're fighting them properly. A few dash punches, and it's on to level 3. Level 3 is Jarek's domain. You need to use the in-game notes once again, as in the car park, or parking lot, I guess, depending on where you're watching this from, has license plates that once again have hidden numbers scattered around, putting them together in the correct order, opening the next section of the level. The second stage is just a bit of run here, grab this, go here, take that experience, and there's a frustrating amount of dead ends in some of the rooms. You'll have an explore around, and there's just nothing to find. All it does is waste your time. The enemies tend to have a lot of HP in this stage, but by this point, you'll have more weapons and have unlocked some combos that I'll cover in a bit. But it's still rather simple to get through. The final stage in this area is a very short one. You just need to figure out the right section to use a detonator on to find a key that lets you progress. It really is just that. Now, Jarek uses throwing knives and he does tend to throw them fast, but who cares, because I'm just going to dash punch him. A side note is that the sniper rifle weapon will knock down bosses on hit, so opening with the sniper rifle to interrupt whatever attack they're doing into a corner knockdown and dash punch is the way to beat every boss with ease. Sorry, Jarek. Level 4 sucks. I hate it. I hate everything about it. The first stage is an open area that you do just need to reach the end of it. There's no little turns and twists that you can take. But the challenge is that there are enemies with rockets and grenade launchers sitting up high, and they stop you from moving forward. Now, it is easy because you can just sniper rifle everyone, but there's certain areas where you can't really line up a shot because you can't see them properly, and this is due to the static camera. It's annoying, it isn't fun, but it is easy enough. Now, stage 2 is the biggest maze in the game, and although it's simple in the long run, it's just really boring. You find the 3 stones that you need to move on, and that's that. But you might get lost finding out where to go first. I know I certainly did. Level 3 is extremely simple as well, as you just need to find the switch to reach the portal. There's enemies in the way, but you have tons of guns now, so you'll clear it easily. Believe it or not though, this is the first game that ever featured Tremor as a character. Tremor has some projectiles and stuff, but he, like Jarek, is child's play when you have a sniper rifle and a dash punch. You can really tell that these boss fights were meant to be so much more. You feel it in your bones the moment they just run around doing the same tiny pool of attacks with no variety. How we went from this Tremor to MKX Tremor is absolutely mind-blowing. The final level is Kano's. You're already at the end, and the first stage here is the worst in the game, in my opinion. There's a lot of these monster-like enemies, but you can just run past them. There's nothing that forces you to fight these guys, and there's more than enough space to lead them past. And none of them have guns either. You again have to find 2 stones to place on altars to progress, and the level's done. But there's almost no walls, and it's an insta-death if you fall off. But because you don't need to fight any of these enemies, you're just running from point to point at a pretty slow speed, and it's not engaging whatsoever. If we had even a small amount of the originally planned movement, these kind of levels may have been more fun. But we got nothing like that in the finished product, and this level is painful because of it. The second level is more of the same, but it's a lot faster, thankfully, and the final level is very similar also. There's just enemies with guns again, so you do have to shoot more, but at this point you have every weapon in the game, so it's not a problem. You reach the end, you fight Kano, who's exactly the same as the other bosses, and Jax uses the artifact to take himself and Kano back to Earth. That's it. That's the end of Special Forces. So with the original plot and ideas being more commonly known in 2023, the story we had in the end was so simple that you can't help but feel disappointed. But while getting through the game, how does everything feel? How does everything look? This is where the mechanics need explaining, because there is a fair bit more to it than just run around, even if it's not much. Now, the attack system is very simple, like everything else really. You have 4 attack buttons, a block, and a special move list, consisting of a ground pound and 2 types of dash punches. The only special move you tend to use is the flaming dash punch, because you have so many weapon options, and the hand-to-hand combat is so easy, that specials just don't get used outside of bosses. I never found any instances where I felt like I had to use a special to move past. One of the main attractions of the game once you're playing it is the level up system. Every enemy that you take out grants XP, and with that XP building towards the next level. With each level, you unlock a new combo string on top of leveling up, giving you a full heal, something that's actually used a lot in speedruns, as rare as they are. Now, there's quite a few combo strings in the game, and the ones that you get right at the end are both damaging and very funny. However, I don't know if it's because I never really experimented much with the others, but they just don't feel useful at first. The 5-hit that you unlock right at the beginning of the game will do great damage. It starts from a fast jab, so you're not as interruptible. It disarms the opponent and it knocks down. So in an entire playthrough, I found myself using that and just that. Now, to be fair, the second to last combo you unlock shrinks the enemy, and it is hilarious. And the final string you unlock has a long knockdown, which grants a free flaming dash punch. But neither are actually necessary. The level up combo system it feels like it's there to be there. I'm sure there must have been more to it once upon a time, and I'm willing to bet that the combos that you unlock here are just kind of left over from an early point. They're just not useful enough. Once you find a couple of weapons and you get that first 5-hit combo string, you're ready to complete the entire game, which feels like a massive missed opportunity, as leveling up in this kind of game is often quite important, isn't it? I look at Special Forces combat and I instantly get nostalgic thinking of something like Fighting Force or other beat-em-ups from the time. Unfortunately though, the combat is not as in-depth or fluent as other games in the 3D beat-em-up genre, even for the original PlayStation. But again, I feel like that's just another sign of stuff that was meant to be in the game, just not being there by the end. When looking at what we were left with, you have a game that's just, a run-of-the-mill PlayStation game. And I think that's the problem for me. Special Forces is playable. You can jump in, clear the levels, learn a few different combos, use a few different weapons. But the problem is, it's just super below average as a video game in general. And when you think about just how red hot Mortal Kombat was at the time, with everyone always expecting the next big thing from MK, the lackluster experience Special Forces provided just wasn't able to match anticipation that everyone has with a franchise like that. I personally do not think it's in the running for worst game of all time. I feel like that could be a bit of an overreaction from those that might not have actually played it. There is fun to be had on a first-time playthrough, and trust me, I've played a lot of straight-up unplayable games in my time. But with one of the biggest franchises in history, kind of okay, it just wasn't good enough for people, and the reviews showed. With everything brought together, with what was meant to be versus what we got, I can only look back with sadness on a game that could have been so much more, but due to various reasons, was left as a mere shadow of what could have been. Now, thank you so much for watching, I appreciate you for tuning in, and I'll definitely see you next time. Take care.